Ciao a tutti, we're back with the Masterclass.
Welcome, everyone. We're so happy to be back with our 2024 Masterclass series. This series is the brainchild of Italians MVC and Made It podcast and powered by BCG and Bitsplace. For those of you who might have missed it, we held the first season. Sorry, Siri started talking to me. For those of you who might have missed it, we held the first season of this Masterclass series in 2023 with some fantastic guests, including Doug Leone from Sequoia, Riccardo Zacconi from Candy Crush, and Carlotta Siniscalco from Emergence Capital. And you can find all of the previous episodes on our podcast, which is available on Spotify, Apple, and all other podcast platforms. And we also want to make sure that you all know that by being live on this session today, you can ask questions. So feel free to insert them in the chat, and then we will basically use the last 15 minutes of this hour to ask your questions to Francesco. So this is really an amazing opportunity for you. So please don't be shy, ask the questions, and we will get to them at the end of the session.
Okay, and we're gonna get started. We're honored to be starting this season with an amazing guest to talk about a topic that I know every founder wants to hear about, which is how to build your fundraising strategy. And for those for those of you who don't know Francesco Simoneschi is the founder and CEO of TrueLayer. TrueLayer is Europe's leading open banking platform. They developed an open banking payments network that allows banking institutions such as Revolut, for instance, the online bank we all know, and companies such as William Hill, the betting site in the UK, to power faster and safer online payments. It was founded in 2016, and TrueLayer is backed by a stellar roster of investors, including Stripe, Tiger Global, Connect Ventures, and Anthemis. And it has received $272 million of funding in total, with its latest round of $130 million in 2021, which valued the business at over $1 billion. So Francesco is the perfect person to talk about this topic. He's also an investor himself. Before founding TrueLayer, he helped create an angel fund called Mission and Market in San Francisco. So you've seen both sides of the equation. And Francesco, we're really thrilled to have you with us today.
Thanks for having me. Ciao Ines, Camilla. It's a great honor, and you absolutely laid out what we do at TrueLayer. So nail it. Thanks.
Great. I'm glad. It's not the easiest business to describe,
I know.
it made sense. And we asked a lot of when I know you can't see everyone, but there's people behind us and lots of people listening. And we asked the founders who registered for this masterclass. Everyone who registered is an Italy-based founder, to ask us a little bit to tell us what they wanted to hear from you and from us today. And a lot of people, almost everybody, said how to plan your fundraising, how to plan your seed round, because a lot of these founders, I'm sure, are getting started and looking to better understand how to start, especially on the fundraising side, and how to find the right investor. So that's really what we're going to focus on today, and we have a lot of questions for you. And the first one is really, let's start with for us, what was the most basic thing? Timing. So when is the right moment for a startup to actively start seeking investments? Before they need money, when they need money? What's the best what's the best starting point for you?
Great question. Let me say, of course it varies, right? Like it varies in terms of what is your specific situation. So I will start with there's nothing better than having a great product and just focusing on building the company. Like everything else, it's kind of optimizing slightly on, like maybe it's going to be a little bit better, maybe it's going to be a little bit faster, maybe it's going to get you something better. But it's rarely the answer, right? Like it's a set of optimization. I think that there are very successful fundraiser with founders that actually they are not even prepared to fundraise. Like they don't have a data room, like the standard, like maybe a financial model to be shared with investor, not even a deck. Like it's I wouldn't say it's common, but like it's not uncommon either, right? And the reason why they succeed is because they have just like great product, and they just like are capable of articulating what is that they want to do, right? So I just don't believe that. Just to be clear, like you fundraise in October versus July, and then like you end up in a very different place. Maybe, I don't know, maybe you're gonna get there 2 weeks earlier, I don't know, or later, but like it doesn't change really anything. My advice is that, because everything at the end of the day always end up taking longer, like unless I would say like you really have all the stars stacked in your favor, like you need to plan ahead, and planning really means like building a buffer of time. So I'm in the school, I'm in the camp of, you need to move earlier than probably what you think. You need to do the work, which means you need to have a very clear idea. It doesn't have to be sophisticated, but like you need to have a very clear idea of what is your financial plan, and don't just model one single outcome. Of course, just model a range of probabilities. Like, what is the probability I'm going to be here, going to be there, and move in a way that is fairly conservative. And I think that, yes, maybe sometimes, you can always like wait 3 months and it's going to be slightly better than before. But equally, I think that especially in the early stage, it's so much narrative driven, so to speak, that, and it's less like numerical, that I think like you want the investor that can look into the future, irrespective of whether like you are 2 weeks or 3 weeks earlier or later, to really the point of like perfect leverage. I think like those are, I mean, good advice, but like it's very marginal, right? Clearly, the best moment of raising capital is when you don't need money. I mean, it's common to say, it's very hard to be in that position. So I think that, but it's true that specifically in this moment of history, strength comes from, I don't need to raise. I'm in a position where I have either incredibly long runway, or I'm even break even or profitable, and therefore investors need to pay the price to be on your cap table. And then you need to think how you're going to spend the money in a way that is value accretive, and not just like throw them out of the window. But I mean, like those are, I mean, I hope that some in the audience like is in this position. Is of course like very hard to be, and very hard to be in this position in the early days. So
Especially
realistically,
especially
like
around seed, it's hard to
exactly.
to be in
And
that
and
position.
sometimes I'm a little bit questioning also the merit of, being insanely profitable, but you have little revenue, and you're very profitable, but like you're not growing. Like I don't know. Like I think that there is a reason why you need to invest, and the history of software and software companies in general is that you need to make an upfront investment, and then somehow in some fashion that allows you to unlock growth and product market fit. So you by definition, you need to, for a period of time, run at a loss in order to eventually be in profit, right? And so you need to have that courage. And maybe right now we are oversteering into this other direction. But anyway, I think that it's important to understand what is your relative. Let's put it this way: it's very important to understand what is your relative leverage in terms of like your point in time. I don't know. You're clearly, if you're completely running out of money and you have a week worth of runway, you're going to be incredibly worse off versus like you have 12 months of runway, right? And so I think like you need to kind of identify what is the point of, where like risk reward is at the peak. Like is this the better ratio of like risk reward, like how much risk you have of running out of money versus not, versus the reward of like raising in that point in time, and how much value you're going to create. it's very hard to do that in a extremely, even numerical way. I think like in a way you also feel like you can educate yourself through numbers and financial model, but eventually, as founder, you need to make a call and have the courage of like being out and see what comes back at you.
And you talked about the importance of product, and we'll talk about it a little bit more. But of course, the success of your fundraising is not just because you're an amazing fundraiser, but it's also because you have an amazing product or a good idea or something that investors want or the market wants, right? That's important to always remember. But also we wanted to sort of break down what else do you need to get started with your fundraising and really try to give some, very specific hands-on advice. And this one is maybe not as specific, a bit more high level, but could you talk about the importance of having a clear vision and mission when you approach investors, especially around seed? Like, what type of storytelling do you have to have in place before you even take that first meeting?
Great question. So let me say one thing. It's important. It's actually fundamental, but even before then, investors, I think like the investors are one of the many recipient of the story, one of the many stakeholders that are going to do something with that story. But frankly, you need to have that clarity of thinking, that sort of like very, very clear plan in your head, or at least like have the best possible approximation to what is a clear plan. Because you need to operate the company. You need to get on board employees, your co-founder, even yourself. You need to know what you want to build, where is that you want to be in the future, what is that you're going after. And it's completely fair to have the known unknowns. Like what is that I know that I don't know? And I think building a startup is effectively a process of uncovering those known unknowns, right? And so, but even with that, you need to have a number of opinions and you need to have a theory, right? And people will agree with your theory. They will think that okay, it's a good theory it's a good model of the world or not, and doesn't matter, right? If important is that some people agrees with you and you execute, right? And so the way you articulate all of that, it's incredibly important. So going back to the fundraising part, I think that it's important to have in mind the vision and mission. But again, it's not a problem of what is my vision and mission statement. Actually, I find that sometimes a little bit grotesque, if you want, like when very early stage companies, they have this like super well thought vision and mission statement. It feels like a little bit of like bullshit, frankly. It's more about what is that you want to do? What is the problem you solve? Can you explain that in practical terms? And can you clearly articulate what your product does, how you build a business around this product, what is the category that this product plays into, and how eventually over time you end up winning most of this category or establishing a new category or something around those lines, right? And I always find very useful for myself to frame basically, like ask yourself two questions, like what is going to be this company in 10 years? Where is that, like, you think it's not just the company, frankly, it's just the state of the world that you operate in, right? All your different stakeholders, whether it's partner, competitors, like the entire dynamic around you, how that is going to pan out because you exist and you fulfill what is that you want to do. But equally, it's almost like, and probably more important, what is that you're going to accomplish in the next 3 months? I don't know, 3 weeks even, right? Like, is that sort of like sometimes hyper tactical mindset is it's similar to basically say, okay, what is your strategy? I mean, this is just another way to basically say, okay, what is your strategy? Can you clearly articulate your strategy? I think in the early days,
we had a chat with Doug Leone from Sequoia, and he called that clarity of thought. Just having clarity in how you explain your thoughts and your ideas and why you're doing what you're doing, I think is the way to summarize it. But sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's absolutely is that source of clarity, and is the, how everything is consequential and derives from first principle. And it may not turn out to be true, by the way. Like you're making like gross approximation of the future, but that's not important. Like it's more important is that consequentially flowing, and some people will believe it and some people don't. But yeah, it's always like, especially at fundraising, it's important that very few people believe it, because that's all you need, right? So yeah. Conversely, what is not, right? Like what is not this clarity of thinking? It's basically a perfect presentation, a perfect pitch deck, like you're great on stage. Like it's nothing like that. Like you can be like completely awkward and kind of like maybe not an expert at this, but still being incredibly good at articulating your ideas and your vision, and be very, very simple, very straightforward of like how everything flows together, and it's okay. I think that, of course, like if you're also great on stage and you're like extrovert in that sense, like it will help, of course, and like with practice you get better, right? That's everybody does that, but that's not in my view, that's not a hard requirement. The hard requirement is this sort of, can you simply articulate what are the three things you're gonna do, and how that impacts your work, right? Now, the other thing that I would say is that we always think in terms of like mission, vision, the problem statement, which is super important. But it's really like when we talk about storytelling, it all boils down to, can I clearly articulate? Sorry for all those notifications. I don't know where they're coming from. Can you clearly articulate also your business model, like your distribution channel, the way you're gonna go to market? Like it's not just like the story, the need, like I build this product for this thing, is also how I'm gonna be successful with this product that I just built. And it's the whole plan, right? A clear articulation of your plan. That's really, I think, 90% of what like we're talking about here. That's like, if there is one secret, that is the secret. Everything else is really marginal gains that could be helpful, but some probably not.
And do you remember, just to take you back to your own TrueLayer experience, do you remember what your first presentation looked like when you were trying to raise your first round?
Hello?
And how much did...
Sorry, I'm not.
Can you hear me?
I think we have some technical issues here.
Okay, no worries.
I can hear Camilla, but you can't hear her.
Okay, yeah, sorry. I tried to. Okay, my fault. Technical.
No worry.
Apologies.
I wanted to bring you back to your TrueLayer experience, and I grew curious of knowing, do you remember your first presentation when you were trying to raise your first round, and how much the story part of your product changed, or your vision changed, or the clarity of thought that you had at the time, whether everything panned out to be more or less in that direction, or things are now very different, for instance?
Right. Yeah, let me think about that. So clearly, if I think about that today, was embarrassing, right? Like clearly, like we iterated so much that it's totally normal that you look back and you say, okay, like basically I pitched almost like a different company, and that's totally fine. And probably like smart investor will and at seed stage or pre-seed stage will understand that. I don't believe it was necessarily the greatest presentation. Actually, I think that myself, my co-founder Luca, we were incredibly nervous at times. Like I remember this partner meeting where basically I think that Luca, like I don't know, like basically broke the door handle of the meeting room or something, because like I was so nervous that like got stuck. Like you do all those awkward, embarrassing things, and you are so tense, and you try to prepare for 100 things that are actually not required, that maybe that important thing like you don't think about. Generally speaking, I believe that we got it right. Probably like we got it right more what we are going to do next than actually the long-term vision. I think the long-term vision, in a way, it's something that we had a theory, but frankly, if you ask me today, it was clearly more blurred than what it is right now. I think right now we know way better our place in the world. But we knew at that time incredibly well what is that we wanted to do tomorrow, the day after, which in our case was, what is the first problem? The problem is that there's going to be a fragmentation of basically the banks building all their own infrastructure. There are 3,000 banks in Europe, and you're a developer, you want to connect to all of them, you need to aggregate all of them. It was kind of like an easy, straightforward effect of this regulation happening, and we were developers and we wanted to solve that problem. And so I think like we got that right at the very beginning, and we could clearly articulate what is that we wanted to do, even though I think that the space itself is quite complex because it's a lot of regulation, a lot of like intricacies that are not very visible and kind of like upfront to many. The long term, I think that we changed that quite a few times as we were learning, basically. Like we learned, okay, what is that you're going to do with this bank infrastructure? And where is that we had a compelling product that we were evolving and we found traction, and also where is that we have conviction as founders. And I said that before, is a process of finding answering the questions about the known unknowns, right? And so the more you answer, the better is going to be your vision of the future, right? But yeah, and in terms of like, you asked me about exposition stuff. I think like we put together a slide deck really quickly, and so I think like one is actually online. Like if you Google it, I think Pietro Bezza put that online, and there is a little story of like how we met, but it's extremely rudimentary. But like the concepts are there, and when sometimes I look it back and it's strange. It still feels incredibly relevant, but equally incredibly old. And I think it's the right feeling to have.
Yeah, we always say you should always be embarrassed of your first everything, right? Because it means that after that there was progress. If you still love it, it means that maybe you didn't go as far as you should have. But pivoting to the financial stuff, which I know is on everyone's mind and it always comes up as a question. And this one is going to be a little bit specific. I don't know how much you have a perception of that because you raised internationally. You're also an investor mostly in Silicon Valley. But what type of early traction in terms of financials does a startup need to demonstrate when they're trying to raise a pre-seed or a seed? And in particularly, I ask this question because there seems to be a little bit of confusion because some Italian investors already seem to want to see some traction already at the pre-seed level, while generally when you hear Silicon Valley investors or Silicon Valley founders, they say, I raised with a PowerPoint and that's it. I didn't have any traction. I didn't have any financials. But what's your view or experience, and what is your recommendation maybe for founders? How much should they be able to show?
Okay, that's a tough question because let me try to unpack it for you. So I think a good investor should try to find sign of product market fit, and that is often expressed in terms of growth rate more than absolute numbers. And some sort of like maybe efficiency metric on the other side. Nowadays is also very important. But I don't believe that there is some sort of like hard threshold that qualifies you for product market fit. It's more about, you may have found product market fit, things are accelerating very fast, and it's about understanding how much you can underwrite, for instance, of your future growth, provided where you are in this point in time, versus actually I need to see the numbers, the hard numbers, right? And it all boils down into your, kind of business model. It's B2B, it's B2C, right? So I mean, and especially at seed stage, I find that sometimes there is a unrealistic pursuit of early traction that I think pushes founders sometimes even like in some sort of like short-term thinking of I need to get to this number so that I get funded and I can now really pursue my long-term vision or whatever. And I'll make an example, and probably like I'm making an exaggeration, but I've been at several Y Combinator demo day, and they all show like pretty much like every single company on stage shows this perfect accelerating chart of probably revenues, or at least like is some KPI, right? It's mostly revenue, but it can also be monthly active user or number of contracts, number of customers, something like that, right? And I am always like very skeptical that like that's like it's a real number, and this is what is going to be important in the future, right? It could be that for most of the companies, what is going to be really important in the future, probably like different things that the very early I did 10K this month, and now I'm a qualify for I mean, this is not the government, right? Like those are private investments, so you don't have to qualify for anything. Like you need to convince another firm to raise capital in your company. Now, one thing that you were saying, like, what is this source of arbitrage of different markets? And this is an important point. And I think it has to do with the amount of risk that investors are capable of taking by considering you a company, for instance, an Italian-based company versus a Silicon Valley-based company. And the reason has to do that, if you look at the Italian ecosystem, like, is historically very hard to build like companies that eventually end up being public or exit for large amounts and some. And so it ends up being very important for if you play in the local ecosystem to build companies that produce revenues early on. And so that is the risking feature that many investors that play more locally versus internationally, they will look, because it's kind of like downside protection for them, more than necessarily a hard signal that you are somehow like you qualify for a certain round. Like I think this is an important point. Like the reason why in Silicon Valley that is not necessarily the case is because the M&A market or in general like the whole ecosystem is much more fluid, like higher velocity. Things are moving faster, money moves faster, number of transactions in terms of M&As and exit is way bigger. The kind of returns that those investors are seeing is substantially more. So it's important to have companies that are really optimizing for the long, like the big swing, the home run, more than necessarily I'm kind of like a smaller outcome, but I'm happy. And so you have this different nature in investors. I think like Italian firms are starting to feel like more international, but it's also true that international firms are actually starting to notice Italy. And so I think this arbitrage of what is the requirement of like a local firm versus a more international established firm is going to eventually gonna close up a little bit. And that, I think in general terms, like this is going to be good for the Italian ecosystem.
Yeah, we're definitely seeing like a really good improvement in the fact that international VCs are now investing in Italy. Today, we actually Futura just announced their Series A round that has 2 international investors that had never previously invested in an Italian startup. So really great to see foreign investors looking at us. Something we always like to to point out on the podcast and when we talk to different founders is how important choosing, not getting money from anyone is. You have to really choose your investors because they're there for the long run. They're it's like another marriage, not just your co-founder. You also have your investors that you bring on board. What would you give as an advice to founders in finding the right, investors beyond just thinking about the money that they're going to give you? Like, what are the questions? What should they be really looking for?
So, it really depends. Like, we're talking about firms, we're talking about individuals. I think Italian companies tend to have a number of, business angels owning a big chunk of the company very early on. And this is both, it's good to the extent that you find some capital, and fine, fair enough. But generally speaking, I think that creates problem the moment that you're trying to qualify your company for a more like institutional round of funding, right? And so it's not uncommon that later on the new investor will want to probably go and change some of those decisions on the cap table to make it more like to just put back ownership to the founders, because eventually our founders create value, investors don't, or is more limited, right? They provide capital and good advice, but that's where they stop, right? So I would say one, it's clearly try as much as you can to every single time you raise capital to raise at a price, terms, dilution that it's within standard, like a standard windows. Let's say, I don't know, it's 20% for a seed round. Fine. Like that's kind of like rule of thumb, right? You can be 25, you can be 15, maybe 30, whatever, but like don't give 60% in your first round. It's probably going to be the wrong choice. So, and this is kind of pretty simple. And when it comes to more like professional investors, I think, and in general, you should always do the due diligence for understanding how reputable is the investor in front of you. So ask for introduction to their previous investments, especially like the ones that have been going on for 5, 6, 7 years, the one that will have some war stories to share with you. I think investors always tend to share the deal that they've done like the month before. And you talk with those founders, which they tell you, oh, it's great, I got the valuation I wanted, happy days, but it doesn't tell you much. I think you need to speak with people that have been building a working relationship for several years, and they will tell you, look, the company was going south, this investor stepped in and did this. Or conversely, we had a lot of problems the moment that we had to do this and that, right? So those war stories are important. So go way back into the past of those investors and partners. I think you can get a fair share of information from the kind of questions that they ask you. My high-level mental model is that whether it's a generalist or an expert investor, like, I don't know, I work in fintech, there's a lot of fintech investors, right? And there are also many generalist investors that are investing in fintech. So this all expertise, I think it does matter, like it builds the reputation, but then eventually you need to figure out for yourself, are they asking me the right questions? Like if it was me investing in my own business, like, are they poking at the right problems? Are they asking you the question that you think that are the most challenging, the one that are like they're really nailing the problem on their head? And usually, I think if they ask 3 dumb questions in a row, I think you have the answer. That probably is not going to be a great investor for you. I'm quick at making those sorts of assessment. I think that it's important that investors do their own work before talking to you. And I think that you should read as much signal as possible into the quality of the conversation you're building with them.
That's very useful. Thank you. And I was actually speaking to an investor on an interview the other day, and he was saying how important it is for the founder to put himself also in the position where they're not like they're begging for the money, thinking that the investor is the most important person in the room, but they, without sounding obviously like arrogant or anything, but it's like the investor is getting an opportunity to maybe potentially invest in your company. So to also position yourself like that, and then listen to your gut feeling, as you said as well, right? You kind of can tell when how the conversation is going. In terms of networking and relationship building, after having interviewed like hundreds of founders with Camilla, we've seen like there's like the serial fundraisers who are really like extroverted. They've built really like incredible networks, and then you really have the founders who have raised a ton of money but who are never at events, who are really always heads down on their product. What's your take on like building relationship, building network? How important is it to like, be at the events, speak to the media, and also any tips on how to build like networks and relationships when you have none? Because obviously when you have a little bit of traction, you have a little bit of popularity, like things come to you, but when you have no one and you don't know anyone, like how do you start?
I think the fact that you see founders being polarized on this topic, it tells you that it varies a lot, and it depends on also the kind of company you're trying to build and your personality. I think eventually also what you enjoy to a certain extent. I think that a level, like when you start from the get-to-go, a level of network is quite necessary. It's not just for raising investment. It's just like for testing your hypothesis, to know what you don't know, to know what your competition is doing, to hire people, to just get smart about stuff, to build credibility upon yourself, to sometimes like maybe a completely new territory for you where like you had an idea but you never worked in the industry before. It's actually my example, right? I never worked in kind of banking, or I from a developer perspective, I understood what I wanted to do, but like I was new to, I don't know, regulation and all of that, right? So I think that a fairly good amount of networking to find the people that are reputable in your category is actually quite useful for you as an entrepreneur. And then of course, like if, as you're saying, like you're a little bit more extrovert, like you're going to enjoy the process a little bit more, and probably you're going to spend more time naturally, because founders tend to gravitate on the stuff that they like to do. And usually they hire people to do the stuff that they don't like to do. And so now the problem with network is that, and I'm talking about like, this is, I don't know, first time founder, maybe fairly young with like limited professional network. I think you are coming across a problem that is this kind of like cold start problem. Like it's not tough to build a network, it just takes time, and at some point it precipitates. So it's just like snowball, right? Because you build enough connection and everybody is adding another connection, and so it goes, at some point it goes very, very fast, and you can go very, very far in terms of like, I want to connect with these people. You find all the connection to get there, but the very beginning is tough because you are disconnected, right? So I think you need to think in terms of, who do I know, who do I have a relatively good relationship, and is also potentially a super node in my network, like someone that can connect me with way more people than I know, and I can lean on this person. And I think that you need to be a little bit shameless when you find those people in your early 20s and you're trying to like do one thing for the first time. You need to be a little bit shameless and upfront and say, look, I don't know much of this thing, but I would love those 10 introductions, and maybe only 5 are going to come through, and you just like rinse and repeat, and understand over time, maybe building a strong relationship with that person is going to be a great investment. In your network, you're going to catch investors inevitably, and more frequently are investors that nowadays are going to catch you. I think that early stage investors starting to really see, an employee that leaves a reputable company, they immediately reach out to see whether they are going to do a startup or something. So I think investors actually, they master the networking way more than any founder would do. So in a way, if you are in this Goldilocks zone of you have enough signal to an investor to be credible, I think our investor will naturally gravitate around you.
Yeah, they're the most professional networkers, investigators on LinkedIn, and making sure they're on the pulse of everything. And in terms of the mistakes, the most kind of common mistakes that you see, given that you're also an investor yourself, when you see like early stage founders pitching, or at the beginning of their journey raising money, what are some of the biggest mistakes that you see, and how do you think they can avoid them?
I would say, the biggest mistake is always not telling the right story. I think that's kind of the big mistake you can do with an investor, is always kind of not telling what is relevant for them to hear, and not being able to portray what you think you want to build in the best possible way, which is that clarity of thinking that we were talking before. It underpins that you're building the right product, of course, and like I think like you need to be critical with yourself and try to scrutinize your own ideas in the way an investor will do. So is it a venture fundable opportunity? Am I growing the right way, or am I a reputable founder myself for this opportunity? If not, what else I need to build in order to have more credibility in what I'm building? So you need to be, maybe is that thing, like being critical enough with yourself and have that clarity of thinking. Then we said that at the beginning. I think every other mistake, frankly speaking, like you can give it a pass. Don't over dilute yourself with, at the very beginning, like giving your uncle 60% of the company. Even though, what can I say, like maybe for some founders that was the only way to start, and maybe that's fine as well, and you're gonna fix it later.
And talking about rejection, which is part of the process of basically being a founder, you're going to get rejected, you're going to get no's, even the most successful. I'm sure you've got a lot of no's and doors that have been shut. What advice can you give of how to handle rejection during the fundraising journey? And another question is basically, if you've received a lot of rejection, is there a time where you just have to kind of give up on the fundraising and just, maybe keep on iterate, change idea? Like, is there a limit?
So, try to prepare yourself. Don't take it too personally, even though I think it's very hard to not take things personally, especially if you're passionate founders. Like the all investors are looking for passionate founders. So therefore you feel things passionately. Therefore, probably a no, you're gonna feel it. There's no way around. And you're gonna think that is a judgment on you and your ideas. And I think that maybe it's more about how do you use that sort of negativity to propel yourself and to find motivation, versus actually being completely overwhelmed by, a week of no's and hard comments and people that are trying to like push you down. So yeah, like just be mentally ready for all of that. And on the other side, just understand that fundraising, which is different than a sales process. Sales process is about making sure that you win most of the deals, right? Like you want to have, let's say, I don't know what is like, in sales, let's say that you have a 60-70% kind of like conversion rate, like you're a great salesperson, but you want to win like more, the majority of the deals that you have, the majority of the customers you're pitching, right? And the stronger is your product, the more you're going to win. With investors, actually, that doesn't matter. Of course, like it's great to always have like a lot of investors that want to invest, and like that drives competition and increases like your leverage, which gives you better terms and all of that. But realistically, you need 1 or 2 or 3 to say yes, and the other 97 can be no, and you need 1. And so it's really a different mental model, when you're trying to appeal to the vast majority versus actually you're fine being appealing for a very small niche. And on the other side, investors are trying to be most often, and I'm not saying that they always manage to, but they try to be contrarian. They try to do basically to believe something that another firm doesn't believe and have a differentiated contrarian thesis. And so it's all about finding that sort of match of you have some sort of like an idea that is hard to believe, but some people will believe it, and you need to find and pinpoint who's this small cohort of investors that are going to believe you. But you need to be prepared. Sorry, what was the other part of the question?
When to give up. And
when
also,
to give up.
Is there a moment where you give up and it's not the right idea? And maybe an add-on to that too is, how defensive do you need to be? So when investors are asking those questions that sometimes they're meant to prompt you, but sometimes maybe the investor didn't really understand what you're trying to say. So how defensive are you of your idea? And I guess then finally, when do you give up if it's really not getting through?
I think it boils down to what is the amount of pain that you can suffer. That's really that. And how much is your conviction into your own ideas, right? And I don't think there is a limit to that. Generally speaking, I think that you shouldn't give up very easily. And I think that as some sort of like self-selection is that people that give up, they don't end up building great companies. And so you need that source of like resiliency in the process, right? So I'm in the camp of you don't have to put a hard cap, but equally you need to learn throughout the process. So maybe a principle that I set for myself is that it's fine to make one mistake. It's not acceptable to make the same mistake twice. And I think you need to apply something like that in your fundraising process as well. So if you understand that you're doing something wrong and you consistently receive a certain kind of feedback, ask yourself, is that gonna change what you do? Is that gonna push you into better your idea somehow or not? Or actually, they are all wrong and you're right, which is also an acceptable position to be, especially when you're building the future. Not everyone will clearly see the future, right? And so, but you need to have a level of intellectual honesty with yourself, and don't kind of lie to yourself. The moment that you kind of like you see that you're becoming some sort of like you're selling snake oil, like you don't believe your own lies, well, that is a big problem. And that's probably like the moment that you should start giving up. Numerically, I would say if after you pitch 50 investors, nothing translates into a conversation that starts to get deep and deep enough, then probably you need to start thinking, I'm doing something wrong in my approach, in my story, and try to see at this feedback. And maybe some stuff, it's very easily fixable, actually.
Thank you. And I see somebody in the comments that wrote, ask for feedback, which is definitely a good tip. We're going to finally open the floor to the questions from the audience. I'm going to start selecting the question. They'll come up on the screen. Alessia Camera is asking, any advice on how to reach out to international VCs, being an Italian founder, which are the pros and cons?
Let's go back to this. You're building a network, right? So a network is not just a problem of like people are connected together, but they are connected together with some intensity and some reputation one to another. Like people will not just be connected, but like there is a certain strength in that connection. So for instance, I think it's totally normal that an Italian founder, whether he's starting to Italy, actually even starting abroad, they have a certain representation of Italian investors at the very beginning, or maybe Italian like Italian operators working for international firms as well. But it's totally fine, because it's part of the game that if you speak the same language, you grow up in the same kind of culture, probably in the early stages, you're going to pick up more signal in terms of like, who's this person that I have in front? And so you're probably going to be more compelled to make a determination and invest in a company. So my advice here, for instance, is like, you can always reach out to international VCs, and if you have a great story, there's not going to be a big problem into that. What I find that is a common pattern is to have an Italian investor that has a very international reach and can be the bridge between your kind of like local reality into the more international world. I think that is a model that starts to work quite well. So there's a lot of operators, whether abroad or in Italy, that are in a way specialized in this kind of arbitrage of ideas. Like I will get a little bit earlier the signal that this is a strong Italian founder, and then take the risk and connect them to non-Italian operators and capital allocators around the world. And there are many.
This masterclass is organized by a group called Italians in VC, which
there you
are
go.
all Italian people that work in VCs around the world. So you're perfect network for this, I would say, based on your answer.
That's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. Don't over-index into that, because there is a point in which like an international investor will probably say, oh, you're kind of too Italian, or you're too French, or you're too German, whatever. But the reality is that, look, it all boils down always to, if you're a great company, you don't have to care about any of that. Like, capital will seek opportunities and will knock at your door, but it's for very few people, right? So the majority will have to work out a smart way to be connected to the broader world. And I find that exactly this sorts of like linking in between is extremely important.
And next up, we have a question from Felipe Hernandez. What would be your advice for cold reach outs in case there's not the possibility of a warm intro? What can be some current effective strategies, and through which platforms?
So I'm very old school that a warm intro is a warm intro, and there's nothing better than a warm intro. And so if you don't have a warm intro, fine. Like your problem is getting the warm intro, not nothing different than that. So, but let's say that I think that the world is changing a little bit, and maybe I think that, for instance, X really opened up this sort of direct connection between investors and founders. And so I find that more and more you see this sort of open conversation about topics. And I think you can engage with personalities and outspoken leaders directly. And I think I think you shouldn't try to sell things, but like if you engage in a conversation, it's like in the real world, right? Like if I try to knock at your door in your apartment to try to sell you something, probably you're not even gonna open the door, right? But if we engage for some topic that has some value, well, then probably there could be a connection there made. I'm still very much like inclined to believe that the warm intro is important, because it increases the signal ahead of the chat. In a way, it comes from a person that is the reputation of the person that makes the introduction also very important. And your ability to find the introduction itself is some sort of like trial by fire. So I think that carries some signal. So I think like you need to work out what is the shortest path to get there, in a way.
Next up, we have a question from Luigi Di Piazza. Do you believe founders should iterate their fundraising stories with non-target investors first before pitching to like lead investors or leads? Do you think founders should focus on lead investors first or last in the fundraising process?
Okay, so certainly focus on lead investors instead of like you're probably it's going to be easier to find people that tells you, look, I only want to put a small check in the round, whatever, but that's not what you need. Most likely you need a lead investor. So I think like you need to have the courage to lean into the big conversation and be very upfront with what is that you're looking for. Like, I'm looking for an investor that can lead my round, and those are the parameters in which that could happen. In terms of like, you need to craft the story. Well, probably yes. It's probably fair to say that practice makes you better, and so with you want to practice with for some reason, like people that you think are less valuable for you than not. But I think that sometimes like life happens, and I wouldn't, let's put it this way, I wouldn't refuse a pitch with a tier one investor because I don't feel ready. I think that that's not the, like, you go there, you show up, you try to do your best, and you seize the opportunity quite aggressively. I wouldn't try to do anything different than that.
And we have a few more questions from the audience, but we're just at time, so we might start wrapping it up. And we had just one last question for you, Francesco, which I think will be on the mind of most people, so worth discussing quickly. So we talked about the current market. The market has changed a lot since 2022. The market changes every year. So in the current landscape, where are there specific trends or shifts that you think founders should be aware of when they're looking for founding? Anything specific that you're seeing right now that you think is worth discussing as our last wrap up few points?
Sure. And I think like I'm gonna probably repeat what everybody else is saying. So AI is going crazy. I think like we are certainly in a little bit of a bubble where no matter how everyone is trying to get smart of like what is the right way to approach it, it really feels like a huge technology trend, and everybody that in a way is trying to be in that race is some of them are actually gonna get great benefit of that narrative. So those are the usual like headwind and tailwind. In this case, AI is an extremely strong tailwind to your story. There's nothing to say around that. It will change. Don't expect that it's going to be there forever. I think like as every speculation, there's going to be a start and an end. But now we are in the very middle of it. This is not about encouraging you to start an AI company just because like there is a speculation. I think like you need to have conviction in what you do. Then it happens to be AI. That's great. But otherwise, I think that I'm not much inclined in that way of thinking. The rest, everybody's saying that. I mean, it's true that the capital markets have changed dramatically. I think this is mostly true for growth stage companies and late stage companies, and maybe the Series A and Series B to a certain extent. But the market is finding some footing, right? Like the problem of investment is volatility. When there is a lot of volatility, investors, they don't know what is the right multiple, what is the right narrative in the market, where is the exit valuation, benchmarks, and all of that. So those are the moments where no one wants to invest because the outcomes at the end are becoming a little bit hard to predict. Right now, I think like we are starting to be back into a stable market. Now, you compare with the past, then it's tougher because interest rate is at 5-6% versus it was at 0. So it's a 5-fold, 6-fold increase, right, versus before. So expect that cost of capital is going to be more expensive. I think at the early stage, frankly speaking, because it's all momentum driven and it's not like a real financial play, you're not really comparing things against public multiple, adjust for growth and things like that, then I believe it's all momentum based. And because entrepreneurship is still flourishing, cost of starting a company keep coming down, and there are more great companies than ever. there's an abundance of capital from one side and companies to invest on the other side, and so you have a very healthy dynamic, very healthy market. Clearly, investors are right now in a more like predicating more discipline than before, financial discipline than before, which is great. We've been way more maybe number orientated, a little bit more conservative. Expect that, but I think in the early stages, it's not that impactful at all. Like it's more later on when your benchmark starts to be public companies that it becomes a slightly different game.
Clear. And yeah, there has to be some sort of route to profitability, whilst maybe 3 years ago you didn't have to prove that maybe as early that on as you have to do today, for the reason you were talking about. But Francesco, it was really great to have you. We had so many more questions, but it's a dense topic. There's so much to talk about, and we also know that it's hard to talk about these topics in such general terms because everyone has a different story and they're starting from a different starting point. But I hope that what Francesco said can serve at least as lessons for all of you listening and just ideas on how to start thinking about your fundraising strategy. And then I also encourage you to find more resources. There's a lot about this topic, so hopefully you can find the answers that you want, but also feel free to reach out if you have specific questions that we haven't answered, and we can try to help you out as well. And we have a lot more masterclasses coming, so stay tuned on this channel. We'll talk about a lot of interesting topics for founders with a lot of interesting and successful entrepreneurs and investors. So we'll see you all soon in the next masterclass. And thanks again, Francesco, for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me. Such a pleasure. Thank you.